No, it's behind Terry Lawrence. Behind Terry Lawrence. Behind Terry Lawrence.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for coming over. For those people who had to walk through the rain, we apologise. We tried to organise most things, but we had trouble controlling the weather today. This afternoon, I'd like to introduce Jacqui Remond. I'm just going to read a little bit about Jacqui's background. Jacqui is a mother of 2 young children with more than 14 years' experience as an environmental educator and advocate. She is National Director of Catholic Earth Care Australia, the ecological agency of the Catholic Church here in Australia. She now lives in Sydney. Catholic Earth Care Australia is mandated through the activities of research, education, advocacy and outreach to give leadership in responding to Pope John Paul II's call for an ecological conversion of the world's Catholics. Among other things, Jacqui is developing partnerships and ecological conversion programs to enable the Catholic Church in Australia to become a leader for ecological sustainability through a program called Assisi. Jacqui will speak about that today. Jacqui graduated from the University of Melbourne with a Bachelor of Education in Science and has taught science, earth and environmental science at schools in Melbourne, Sydney and in the Kimberley. Jacqui has lectured in environmental science at Notre Dame University in the following areas: global principles of environmental science, natural resource management and Australian ecology. Jacqui has a passion for Northern Australia, and prior to her current role, she was the coordinator of the Northern Australian Environmental Alliance. In this role, Jacqui worked with 10 environment groups, including WWF Australia, the Australian Conservation Foundation and the Wilderness Society, to advocate for the protection of Northern Australia and to promote best practice environmental management of Cape York Peninsula, the Gulf region, the top end and in the Kimberleys. You can imagine in her work she at times over things like climate change has some interesting discussions with Cardinal Pell, but only on that area. Cardinal Pell is a very strong supporter of sustainability and the way the Catholic Church needs to respond. One of Jacqui's quotes is that the Church owes it to our Creator God to reduce emissions. It's an area we all care about, an area we all need to be involved in as Catholics and as good citizens of the earth. So ladies and gentlemen, I introduce Jacqui Remond.
Thank you, Laurie. That was a very kind introduction, and I must say I feel really blessed to see so many of you here in this room. It's a really beautiful thing for us to focus on, isn't it, at this conference, on grace. And yet the flip side that was mentioned in the last presentation about tragedy is a space that we have to grapple with all the time. The realities that are not always grace-filled, that there are tragedies that we need to face. So today I'd like to share with you some of the ways in which our agency would like to encourage you to continue the great work you're doing as educators and as leaders in this diocese in terms of ecology, in terms of this diocese and this place that you're from, or perhaps you find yourself living in at this time, and to grow that beauty, that connectedness and the graceful moments that you can have and share with your students and with one another. In looking at this question of what do we do, how do we tackle the biggest issue that humanity faces, I believe, is the one about how we deal with our planet. The depletion of natural resources, the fragility of our atmosphere, the loss of biodiversity, all these tragedies, yet were once given as graces, is something for us to reconcile. As human beings, we've been given a unique gift with our hands, with our intelligence, with our capacity to integrate all that we are, to relate to creatures, to relate to the earth, the non-living things, to protect them and to preserve them. So we have a great challenge, and it's not just Catholics, of course, who face this challenge, it's everybody. And it's a space in which interfaith dialogue and humanism and all of that space of conversation can take place. No matter what your values and beliefs are, we're all living on this earth. We're all from the earth. We see ourselves as a gift from God. Others may not relate to it in that way, but we still value the fact that we are alive, that we can do things on this planet for the good, or perhaps not for the good. So how do we grapple with the ethics of that? How do we hold conversation in that space? Not only amongst ourselves, but with others who have different values and beliefs. This is all part of the challenge in our times. And so one of the quotes I'd like to share with you is about the power of inquiry. Because it doesn't matter how far along the depth of that journey you are in recognising that we need to respond to the ecology and the ways of life so that it continues to give life. It doesn't matter where we're coming from. We all need to be open, as our last speaker was sharing with us, Sister Marianne, it's that openness. And Bishop Putney spoke about that too. Our openness to inquire into our lives, into ways of being that are going to be more life-giving, more nurturing, enabling us to have a future that is filled with the goodness of life. So Albert Einstein said, if I had an hour to solve a problem, and who knows how long we've got, probably our whole lives, and my life depended on the solution, I would spend the first 55 minutes determining the proper question to ask. For once I know the proper question, I could solve the problem in less than 5 minutes. So how are we coming into this space of ecological grace? Are we looking for solutions? Are we looking for questions to ask? That orientation is really important. Because if we come in thinking that there are solutions and that we just need to jump to those solutions, which is a classic human thing to do, and we forget to ask some really important questions, then we're going to depart down a journey or a path that perhaps might not be the best one. And given that our very lives and the future of our children and their children's lives depend on it, we really owe it to ourselves to suspend from leaping into that action before we ask or search and begin to ask the right questions. Catholic Earth Care operates through some pretty simple principles. The first one relates to participation. And of course the building block of this is relationship. We recognise that everything is interconnected and that interwoven fabric of life and non-living things is in fact something that we really want to enable to stay strong and vibrant and healthy. So relationship is the basic building block for all of this. And the call here is for us to engage at every point in a way that enables participation. So very much the reformist approach in the church relates to this. It's not about the leaders and the followers, it's about everybody participating. So that's one of the principles, and we'll exercise that together in the workshop. The second one is communion. Communion at the root of the word, meaning to come together, to embrace, to connect at a very deep level. So our communing, just by being in this workshop, is a very healthy thing to be doing. And yes, we think and we talk about communion in our church practice and life through Eucharist, which is an incredibly special celebration, a special way for us to commune, where we acknowledge not only the good and the beauty of all creation, but its brokenness too. We offer that up every single time the bread and the wine are shared. We offer up that brokenness. And we acknowledge that as a family of human beings, with all of creation, we want to heal that. So there's a sense of communion that goes deep into our faith lives. But there's a sense of communion we can share with others of other faiths as well. And one of the other things that perhaps isn't a principle in the same way participation in communion is ecological consciousness. It's from that root of conscientising one another all the time, the little tweaks we can make in our lives to how we live to become more and more sustainable on the planet. That's the basis for this coined phrase, ecological conversion. And ecological conversion is very much at the heart of why our agency exists at the Curve Care Australia. It was recognised that if there isn't a radical change, a completely radical change in the way that we think, in the way that we feel and connect with one another from our hearts, and in our actions, then we're treading down a path that is surely going to cause great harm and destruction. So ecological conversion is in fact our core business, and it's at the heart of what we do. And I'm sure it's at the heart of what you do and who you are. And sometimes it's just around recognising that language and realising that from the moment of our inception, in terms of our birth, going back to when we're in our own mother's wombs, we are part of a story that is so much bigger than we can fathom. And so ecological conversion is present for us at every moment. And again, it's about the call to participate in that, the grace-filled moments to recognise that that's the journey we're on. That's what we're called to do. That's who we are called to be. Just a word on participation and change. We're called to be leaders, leaders of change. And a quote from Margaret Wheatley, which I think really shares a sense for me around how we're called to do this work. Yes, it's a very deep personal call, but it's also a very deep collective call. So how are we organising ourselves? How are we approaching this in our school community, in our parish community, in our diocese as a whole? Margaret said, I don't personally spend time anymore on elaborate plans or timelines, and we might add, or programs from what we heard this morning. I want to create the organisational conditions for people to set a clear intent, to agree on how they are going to work together, and then practice to become better observers, learners, and colleagues as they co-create with their environment. And I've learned that great things are possible when we increase participation. So if there's one thing I'd like you to take away from this workshop, it's to think about how you can enable more and more participation from people around you in this way of being that's about being deeply connected with the earth, that's about inquiring, that's about being in dialogue with it. So there's a question. When we hold a worldview that embraces a participative awareness and consciousness, what are the associated views of change? And how are we to work with change processes in our organisations? If we really believe that participation is at the heart of how we're going to do this, how are we going to organise those change processes? What approach might we take? Connecting that through now with the Spirit. This is a quote from Father Dennis Edwards. You may well know him. For those who don't, he is an ecological theologian who's been writing books for many years. He's written about 12 books, and they're often pitched in that theological language for readers who are very interested in theology. And just recently, he's written a new book because he recognised that he needed to present his message on ecological theology to the popular people, to the layperson, to the Catholic world in Australia. So he wrote a book called Jesus in the Natural World, and it was launched last year. And for those who are lucky enough to sit in the front row of seats here, there's a free flyer on those with a little bit of a promotion about it. There are a couple of copies at the door, and of course you can access this information through Catholic Birth Care. Father Dennis Edwards is a very gifted writer, and he was able to put very clearly his thoughts about ecology and faith, so bringing together the worlds of science and faith in a way that is understandable, that is enriching, that enables wonder and awe to be the source of our connectedness, and that everybody agrees with. by and large. So this is a pretty special theology. It's like finding the gold when you go searching for theology that's going to work around this love and care for creation that I hold, and enabling that conversation space to grow when I speak with bishops and others. This theology is the kind of theology that you can transfer into very simple language with students, and I think it's well worth delving into it. So here's a quote from Father Dennis about the Spirit. The immanent power of continuous creation, this is how he defines the Spirit, the immanent power of continuous creation, enabling a universe of creatures to exist, evolve, and flourish, breathing life into the emergence of bacteria, humans, animals, creatively at work in the whole process, celebrating every emergence, loving life in its diversity, and treasuring its every instance. God continually giving creation itself the capacity to become something new. So if we think about the Holy Spirit in that way, active in creation, then it's something again for us to connect in with when we're grappling with ecological grace. The Holy Spirit constantly there, always inviting us to recognise it, to be changed by just acknowledging it, and to orient ourselves to the Spirit in His Word. Teilhard also said some amazing things about ecology and faith. I love this quote because I think it touches on ecological grace. Someday, after mastering the winds, the waves, the tides and gravity, we shall harness for God the energies of love. And then, for a second time in the history of the world, humanity will have discovered fire. So our role as leaders, especially as educators, when we're talking about faith, how do we connect that in a way that's going to enable our students and one another to have a deep sense of faith? Well, Daniel O'Leary's book provided this gift. Communicating faith is not primarily a matter of supplying propositions and information, although that is part of faith, but rather evoking and naming experiences. The teacher of faith should help his or her hearers examine their experience and offer categories to them for understanding their experience. When we reflect on ecological grace, what are the experiences that come into your heart and your mind? This morning we saw some absolutely superb imagery on the screens. And I know that for each of you, you would be deeply connected with particular places, perhaps in this diocese, perhaps right near your home, perhaps it's coastal, perhaps it's a rocky outcrop. Whatever those places are where you have an experience that connects you with God, with a sense of oneness. I'd like to invite you now to have an experience of dialogue together. We often do this in our programs, whether we're helping set up or stimulate the next step for a sustainability steering group at a diocesan level, at a hospital or a school, or perhaps when we're forming groups in our staff days or our formation programs like the Creation and Reconciliation week-long program. We often take a dialogue walk. We find that it's a beautiful way to spend time that's holding a deep space of reflection and being. Today, because we're in this room, we won't be able to do the walk in nature that would accompany it. But I think we can all connect with those places in our dialogue. So I encourage you just shortly to consider turning to the person next to you, or perhaps better still, if we stand up and go to somebody in the room who we've perhaps not spoken to today, perhaps we've never met them before, or perhaps it's been a while since we last spoke. sit down together anywhere in the room, stand up if you like, sit on the floor, wherever you feel comfortable, and just spend some time in dialogue with them. And perhaps this could be the question that helps trigger your dialogue. How do you know when you are connecting with your deepest sense of self or God? How does it feel when you experience this connection? So how do you know? I'd like you to spend 5 minutes each sharing. And dialogue is one of those special things where it's sort of beyond a conversation, where it's not appropriate perhaps to jump in when somebody's sharing something, to just suspend that. So conversation, being on the left in this diagrammatic representation, we have a choice point in every conversation we hold. We have a whole lot of embedded patterns based on our experiences in life up until that point in conversation. Things we've seen, things we're thinking at the time, the way we're feeling. When a conversation opens up, we could hold on to those patterns of thinking, the things we feel we know, the responses that we've given before. And in that way we can go into a skillful discussion or perhaps even a debate. So that's the way the conversation might track. I'd like to encourage you to go into a dialogue. So the critical choice, rather than the same pattern, is to suspend. So don't leap in. Don't have the same thoughts. Just suspend the thoughts that might rush in. Suspend the feeling, space that you might be holding at that point, and reflect together. So rather than responding, just listen for 5 minutes, whole minutes. Doesn't mean that you can't be warm and listening and obvious to the person who's sharing something with you. Just means not to speak at that point, just to truly listen to them. And then after 5 minutes, just to change over and to listen, to have your turn to speak or to listen. One more thing before our dialogue. We like to use, and with our CC initiative, which is not a program by the way, we purposely call it an initiative because it's no end and it's an open-ended way of pulling together the methodologies, the frameworks, and the ways in which we might approach sustainability. One of the methodologies we use is called Theory U, and it was put together by an international change expert, if you like, called Otto Scharmer. You can see a U-shape in the arrow that's on the slide there. And he suggests that whenever we're going into an authentic space of change, we follow this U journey. If we don't change, we simply just move across in a bit of a linear journey. But if we're deeply going into a change, we actually connect with Source, he calls, at the bottom of the U, which we call God. And then we come up the other side quite changed. It involves a space of using open mind, opening our hearts, and at the bottom, in terms of Source, opening our will. So it's not my will, your will, but it's more a collective will, and it's a sense for us of God's will, letting God's will inform how we speak and what we do and how we live, and what that project might be. So you might have preconceived ideas going into the conversation, but if you open your mind, open your heart, and open your will, collaboratively you'll come out with something quite different. And that's grace, isn't it? I mean, in some way this is a new theory of grace. Just to focus for a moment on listening, you can see if we listen from habits, then simply as someone's sharing with us or we're watching a video or we're reading something, we're recognising things and we're just saying, you know that, I know that, I've got that. It's reconfirming what we already hold in our knowledge base. But that's not a deep enough way of listening for dialogue. So listening perhaps from the outside means we're listening for differences, factual things. This is when we listen with our open mind. And so we might find that there's something new we learn and pick up. But we can go deeper still. If we listen in an empathic way, with our hearts open, then we're actually able to see through the other person's eyes. we're able to connect at a much deeper feeling level. And actually, that will transform us in another way. The fourth style of listening is to go to that source or God. So in generative listening, we actually want to listen with our will completely abandoned. We need to completely shed and let go of what our will is, to let God's will become known to us. And that could be through a generative conversation. And it could very much be through a process where you're wanting to deliberately let something emerge from the future. Today I'd like you to just focus on the empathic listening. So open mind, open heart. So now's our time to have some dialogue. You've been listening a lot this morning, you've been sitting a lot this morning. I'd encourage you to get up and move, and I will call time. So in 5 minutes to change over. So find someone in the room you haven't spoken to before. Go into a space of dialogue where you are really listening. To really get that muscle strong. We've got to work at that. And I think that's really important, because even if you have that time with somebody you know really well, someone you see every day, a partner or whoever it might be, it's so interesting the depth you can go to in dialogue. Even in a short time, it might feel like you've spent an hour together because of the depth you've travelled to, but it's only 5 minutes. And if we do that with the colleagues and those that we love regularly enough, those who we are wanting to bring about this ecological change with, we're far more likely to get there sooner than later through the power of dialogue. That's why it's so powerful. But again, we have to practice it. It's a bit like meditation or contemplation. The more we do it, the better we'll get at it. And the more fruit will come. And that was in the last session too. Sister Marianne talked about the relationship between dialogue and prayer, which I thought was fantastic. She said the more we do dialogue, the more fruitful our prayer space will be, and vice versa. So that's a really important practice, I think, for us to keep doing together, because as Einstein said, we've got to spend time searching for the questions, and that starts with a deep search of ourselves. So that's what dialogue opens up, when you have the willingness of somebody to share that time together. And as I said, it doesn't need to be a long time. The other thing that's important to note is that the success of any of our interventions, whether it's a dialogue, whether it's a dialogue walk, whether it's trying to enable your school to have a reduced ecological footprint, whether it's a veggie patch, it doesn't matter what it is. But the success of your intervention is determined so much by your interior condition as a leader, as a teacher, as the intervener, somebody who's wanting to change something. So that says we have to be very careful about the space in which we are. We know how busy we can get, we know how distracted we can be. So to take the time to stop, to spend time contemplating, to spend time in dialogue is so important if we're going to succeed with transforming to a sustainable future. So I'd like to just encourage that in terms of saying another part of our learning in terms of sustainability. None of us have lived in a sustainable world that I'm aware of yet. So we all have enormous amounts to learn, not only about what it is, but actually getting on with how to do it. So for us, it's really important to be aware that we have blind spots, places we can't see that we're blind to because of who we are and where we've come from and what has formed us. And if we're aware of those blind spots, or the fact that we even have them, then we're far more likely to be open to learn from one another, rather than to assume that we know things. A blind spot in this context was defined by Otto Scharmer as the inner place from which we operate, our level of consciousness. So what is our current level of consciousness when it comes to ecology? For all of us, there's an opportunity to go deeper, to understand more. That's the invitation. So what's our blind spot at the moment? What counts is not what we do as leaders, and not just how we do it, but the space from which we're coming from as we do it, where we're operating out of, where our words are coming from and our actions. So we need to ask ourselves, what sources are my colleagues actually operating from? Maybe that's why we're getting the same patterns happening, because we're not expanding and illuminating and learning from one another so that those blind spots or those sources become better understood. It relates very much to worldview. So when I was reflecting upon this session on ecological grace, I thought about all the different dimensions that I just wanted to share that came to me. So there's a lot on this slide, I know, but it's an invitation. I don't have time to delve into each of these, but just to offer them now, and then to share with you a resource that we developed that's very much about grace. It's called Pure Gift. So one of our invitations with ecological grace is a commitment that we can make to continually develop a personal worldview that integrates ecology in whatever way. I put ecological theology there because I think ecology, when it relates to God, is ecological theology. But for you, ecology might be the right fit without that. It's very open. But whatever it is, it's a commitment to continually learn and be on this journey with one another, with all of creation. Integrating sacred scripture, Catholic social teaching and science is a key part of learning about ecological grace that Catholic Earth Care brings. So that's the space in which we sit. We're always looking at how sacred scripture can be further unpacked, to unravel it, to see how that informs how we act in the future. The same with Catholic social teaching, which is about 100 years worth of knowledge that's been built up through what popes have been doing and saying, and through all the different understandings we have about those principles. And science, so the search for truth through scientific truth, is another important dimension for us to interweave and unpack and unravel our blind spots around. Experiencing the natural world, nothing can beat that. Nothing can replace what it means for us to actually be connected in a natural world setting with other human beings or without. The natural world and the understanding of God's creation is open for us every single time we are present to that. Seeing God in all things, human-made, not human-made, God being present in all of that. Being open to listen. So as we experienced this morning, we've got a lot of practice to do listening to one another. How do you think we might fare if we spent 5 minutes, an hour, just listening to the earth, listening deeply in place? What would we hear? What do we hear? How do we respond to that openness to listen to creation? And of course, God is in all that, listening to the earth and others. One of the other things that I've picked up on this journey is the need for us to respond in ways that is not just powerful or not just loving, but in fact is both. The combination of bringing a response that is powerful and loving is that difference that I think we need to bring. It enables compassion to exist in our responses. And of course, beginning with thank you, being grateful for what we have, for the gift of life and all that we experience. So being gracious in our presence with creation is something to encourage in our children very much. So when I finish a bath routine of an evening with my two little ones, I have a 2-year-old and a 5.5-year-old, taking the plug out has been a bit scary for my 2-year-old, but she's getting better with that. Listening to the water whirring down the plug hole, I say to her, what do you say to the water? And she says, thank you, in her little voice. And I say, what are you thankful for? And she'll say, for playing. What else? For washing me. She'll just say whatever it is. And I just think that's such a great way to connect her with that gift of water that we realise more and more is so precious. So all those little things that we can be grateful for. Participating with creation to protect its beauty and restore its brokenness. So being attentive and being grateful for the beauty that we have around us is key. But also recognising what's missing. You know, I think in some ways we've got a blind spot because where we live on the east coast of Australia has particularly been denuded through logging that happened well before our lifetimes, when the giant cedars were taken away to build, you know, the furniture in the courtrooms in the UK and all of that. And then slowly but surely, of course, legislation was brought in to clear blocks of land before we lived on them or before we set up farm. How different is our country because of that? What loss of biodiversity is taking place? We've got fragments left. We've got such tiny threads to hold on to. So how can we be attentive to that brokenness in a way that's life-giving? How can we nurture a change, even if on our own small block of property or, you know, in our school grounds? What is it that we can bring? And I would encourage endemic native species always over others. But you know, there are ways of healing that brokenness that each of us can participate in over our lifetime. I think that restoration is God's work. That's what we're called to do, as much as we're called to heal one another who is sick or unwell. Healing our native environment is really important. Communing with God and all of creation at any point in time. So knowing that at any moment we have that opportunity for grace, wherever we are, to connect with that. That's incredibly comforting and beautiful. Being ecologically conscious and actively working towards sustainable ways of living together, well, that's a huge challenge for us. And again, I think that dialogue space is important to talk about what is it that you've learned, what are you doing differently at the moment, you know, whether it be composting, whether it be whatever it is that's new policy that you're bringing in school, talking that through together, having a space to consider and contemplate that. And the other key point I would suggest, and I know that you have this process of networking among schools in Townsville, and that you're been encouraged to be on this journey through this diocese for some years, which is absolutely wonderful, is to continue to nurture those communities, that networking, so that as communities across schools and within schools and across the diocese and in parts of the diocese, you're able to nurture those conversations with one another. You're able to bring about those practices, those retreats, those experiences that foster that community, that participation. From that, all the simple actions and solutions will start to happen anyway, because you're oriented from a heart space, from a change of mind, and your actions just flow from there. So it's much easier to do it from that space, even though it might seem to take longer and be harder, than to come in with a compliance-based approach. Sometimes that's appropriate, sometimes that's the way to go with certain things, but I would really encourage a holistic sense of nurturing your communities for transformation, for sustainability. And lastly, I'd just like to share with you before we finish an animation which was written by a colleague of mine who has 3 sons. He was writing a legacy letter to them, and we thought that we should put this in an animation that's about 5 minutes to share with people, and you're welcome to access this from our website. Share it with your students, with your communities, as a way of connecting in, not only with the theme of grace, but with the theme of what's deeply calling us in terms of sustainability. site, by the way. We're currently constructing a new one. And at the front, you'll see a whole lot of new quotes from Pope Francis. So if you ever want to see what his latest things are, we always hold a space for that. And of course, we're really excited that he is Pope Francis. Just some visits we've been doing schools and the Murray River. And then just under that is this resource called Pure Gift.
Dear Patrick, Dominic and Lachlan, for a while now I've wanted to try and explain to you what it is that I do and why. In some ways, this is the simplest yet hardest thing to do. How do you explain that once you have discovered it, you can only do what you are called to? Ever since I can remember, I have known a gentle and persistent presence, something of a whisper that has been a constant companion, waiting for me to surrender. It's only now that I can look back to recognise this movement as an encounter with the patience and unconditional love of God, to name what it's asking of me, and to live into it by returning the gaze. For once you have found it, you can only give it back. And you know, the more I surrender, the more I have recognised that in coming home to a more personal knowing, I have also been opened up to see and encounter the deep interconnections of all living things. Somehow what whispers within also whispers without. As you are now coming to recognise as well, we as humans have had the wonders of the universe and its mysteries opened up to us like never before, revealing all life as gift and dependent upon the other, the living. Somehow the personal and the global cannot be separated. Indeed, as we come to recognise the interconnectedness of all life that science is revealing to us more and more, we as humans are being challenged by the very way we perceive ourselves and live. From lording over to living with, from arrogance to love. So too are we being confronted with the consequences of devastation and destruction that has wounded our planet and alienated our soul. A way of being more in tune with the rhythm of life is the call of our times, and it is to this that I give myself. As is the way with spirit, it always awaits our return and stands in need and longing for our communion. A longing that has led me to the door of Catholic Earth Care Australia. As a sign of the times, for 10 years now, Earth Care has been reawakening people and organisations to a deeper story, giving shape to an ecological vocation that weaves science, theology and Catholic social teaching into an integrated whole. In many ways, we heal blindness, inviting people to enter a journey of transformation where they can personally and collectively embody a deeper way of knowing, emerging into a future of right relationship with all life. Most importantly, we give over to grace, knowing really that it is not our work. And so we simply craft out spaces for co-inquiry and deep listening, to once again reconnect to the thread, to reconsider what it is to be human, to be re-enchanted with the mystery and deep spirit of life, to fall into a far bigger story than we have designed for ourselves. Essentially, Earth Care initiates the shift into reconnection with all things to reawaken an ecological consciousness that is made visible. All across our country and beyond, in schools, parishes, hospitals and homes, seeds of transformation are being born and being connected, coming together in a movement from perfection to participation, from control to compassion, from fear to faith, beyond certainty to mystery, into a present of presence, towards a future that we were always and forever destined. In many ways, I am seeking my deepest wish for you all. For you to know that you were born out of love, to grow into life in your own unique and called way, and to give back this finding as pure gift. With love, Dad.
It's not playing things, what I was going to say, it wants to do its own thing, so that's fine. I think we need to finish there, and I think the invitation is to continue the relationship for yourself around dialogue, around contemplation, to keep growing your and nurturing your communities for transformation, and to stay in touch with Catholic Earth Care. Some of you were signing in on the sheet as you came in. The idea was if you wanted to be part of our network and receive our newsletters periodically and news and invitation to formation events and things like that, feel free to just put your email address on one of those pages. I left the page